Welcome to Peer Check. I'm your host, Adam Keating, and today we're talking about trends in manufacturing and why innovations are getting stuck. My guest is Robin Dechant, and this guy's done it all in the manufacturing world, from being on the investor side at Point Nine Capital to creating the famous Industry 4.0 map in the manufacturing community to now starting his own company, Aveo. Robin, welcome to the show.
Alan, hey, thanks again for having me here.
Before we get into any of this, tell me what this map is. Like, I've seen it hundreds of times circling on the internet. Why did you start this, and what is it?
Yeah, so I heard some people call it's a famous map by now. Maybe give a little bit like the backstory how I actually created it. I was starting my first job at Point Nine Capital. Point Nine is like an early stage VC investing, a few couple of millions into B2B companies, mostly software and marketplace companies, but worldwide. And I started in 2016 in summer, and I think in early 2017, I slowly basically saw a lot of companies focusing on what was then called Industry 4.0. It's a fancy term. I think last year it's had his, I think, 10th birthday or so. Anyway, for me being a little bit new to this industry, I mean, I have an engineering background, but still, didn't understand a lot about what these companies were doing. And it was very early. So initially, basically, I created like just a Google sheet, and adding all these companies that I was seeing. Hey, we digitize the shop floor, we go into engineering, we're building digital twin software, whatever. And very fast, actually, within like a couple of weeks, I was diving deeper into this. I think this list already had like 50 companies or so. And so I thought to myself, oh shit, how do I keep an overview of this, right? So somehow I came up with like, okay, I need to categorize all of these companies. And so, I was looking at the websites, I talked to the founders, and then I came up with a few categories, and I was basically, sorting these companies in these categories. And, I was going deeper again, and then suddenly there were, I think, like 80 companies or so. And so then I was like, I did a lot of work with this Google sheet, with talking to all these founders, with all these insights. And so I basically was just compressing all these insights into one blog post, where part of this blog post was basically a map showing all these company names within the different buckets. And this was, I think, in 2017 in summer, if I'm not mistaken, which was the first time I published it. And back then, roughly 80 to 100 companies. And basically, since then, I keep on, adding new companies, but also removing companies that do not exist anymore. And today, this map has more than 500 companies. So it's
Wow.
basically a map of 500 startups, and it's by far not complete. And also, I know that some companies maybe fit in different categories, but I think it's fair to say that's probably the best overview of industrial startups on one map, so to say.
It's absolutely amazing. And it's global too. Like, I've seen that it's companies all over the
It's
world.
global too. I think the focus is on North America and Europe because also there was the focus at Point Nine. And since I'm native German and I was also quite active in the German market, I think there's a certain bias into it. But it's definitely not only Germany, not only Europe, but kind of like global at least. Yeah.
I remember when you first released it and it was on LinkedIn and people were commenting in the thread like, "Oh, this company and that company and you missed this one." And it turned into this like thing people kind of became proud of, I think, honestly. And I'm curious on the other side, the big companies, the manufacturers, the leaders. Did you have people reaching out to you looking for introductions or how to find these companies or who's the right fit? Did you start getting those types of connections too?
I think I got really very different kind of requests, like from different kinds of people and different kinds of companies. From M&A banker who asked me for an Excel file. Hey, can you send me all these companies in an Excel file? I'm like, sure. I have like 5 years of work. Here is it. No, of course not. But and then from people working at companies and marketing departments, hey, can you please add our company? We'd love to be part of this list. And then also, of course, of people, let's say, in digitization departments, in large corporates who wanted to better understand actually all the players, the different segments, where there's growth, where maybe there's opportunities and so on. And to be very honest, I mean, for me, it was really a great wedge to just expand this map, but also expand my network. And again, this helped me again to know more about these companies and the market in itself. So it was just like a great learning tool, if you want.
Yeah, that's amazing. So where can someone find the map today? I mean, I've seen it 100 times. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll probably find it, but where can you find it today?
You can find it on my newsletter. So I have a newsletter which is called The Future of Manufacturing. I think if you Google it, you come across it on my LinkedIn profile. And of course on the blog post that I usually update still and put the map out there.
Sweet. That's amazing. So I'm curious then, like I know I read at the beginning of the year, you talked about some of your insights for, this year. And obviously this map has helped you kind of look at this. What do you think? What do you see as hot? And I'll go to the opposite. What do you see as not after? But what's hot right now?
What's hot right now won't be hot in 2 years anymore, maybe. So I think that's already something. And that's maybe to how it started. So when it started, a lot of companies put the term Industry 4.0 on their homepage. Then it was digitization. Now I think a lot of companies somehow use sustainability. I think most of them use it as a buzzword, to be honest. And
Yeah,
so for me personally, and this might not be reflected on the map, but what I think is super hot or super exciting is everything around infrastructure. And so maybe to give you a little bit of the backstory on this, I think, my co-founder and I were sometimes joking, and he comes from manufacturing and software. We're sometimes joking, a factory today is similar to like a LAN party. Over
hmm
time, basically everybody brings his or her own, machine or PC, and you somehow connect them, and as soon as you rip off something out of the system, maybe everything will crash. And so,
yeah,
that's why most of these factories that got, built up, in the last few years or even decades, it's very, very hard to just, set up a new software system within the factory floor. And so I think systems that basically now bring this factory stack, that's how I call it, basically the software stack, now into the
yeah,
cloud makes it super exciting because, as soon as you have more software operating in the cloud, it makes it much more easier, for other companies to build applications on top of it. And I think many people dream still of this kind of like app store for factories, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I think we're far from this for now, but I think it's very exciting just to understand, what are actually the biggest leverages to build stuff for factories very fast and efficient way. That's why I think, investing in infrastructure, like in manufacturing execution systems, for example, is one very interesting wedge into the market.
Yeah, it's honestly we're seeing very similar. Like I think teams are focusing more on execution than they are like the big, pie in the sky, big dream of turning something into a digital twin for the sake of it being a digital twin. They're thinking about, how do I make my people more efficient? How do I give them tools that aren't so crappy? How do I actually just connect all this stuff together? That's what we're seeing. Like the people who are really truly making change are focused on something really tangible now, and it doesn't need a buzzword anymore. Like it just is a piece of software that fits together nicely with all your stuff that's pretty easy to use. Like largely, that's what we're seeing, or technology that's like that.
Yeah, and I mean it's crazy because 2022, right? And we're collaborating in lightning speed, within Google Sheets, Notion, whatever. And then you see these mechanical engineers, that still share, and I mean you know it better than I do, right? Like long
Yeah.
PDFs, screenshots, annotated, taking pictures, maybe printing like a page, writing something, taking a picture and sending it to a colleague. It's crazy. It's
Oh,
crazy inefficient. It's crazy how collaboration actually is still such that the current toolset doesn't enable fast collaboration within different teams or even within one department.
and let alone cross teams, and it's top to bottom too. Like it's early ideation straight through to like sustaining and delivering products. It is like the whole stack. Like when we started thinking about collab, we could have picked any part. Like we chose like heavy design focus, but the same problem exists defining requirements as it does getting something into manufacturing, as it does like mass producing something,
Yeah.
to taking care of it. And it's like that's why I like what you said with the factory stack. Like I think it's much broader than that. One thing I want to ask you about, because this is going to become, I think, a hot topic with the big PLM vendors in the next couple of years. What's your perspective on API and openness being integral to a factory stack?
I'm a big believer in open source, so I would strongly, love to see more open source solutions. I think maybe a lot of people, even developers, maybe in these companies, might not be the biggest fans of open source yet, right? Compared to, let's say, tech, for example. So I think this bottom-up adoption for these tools is probably harder in this industry than, let's say, in other industries. So that's maybe a little bit why I'm a little bit hesitant. I think APIs, just given the complexity of all these systems and giving the super fragmentation of the landscape, I think there's no way around, APIs and interfaces. And that's probably something that I think goes back again to this, like factory stack and
Yeah.
infrastructure, why I'm so bullish about also like APIs and interfaces. And I think another maybe reason or another point for this is if you would build today a factory from scratch, you could implement top-notch software all in the cloud. That's easy. I think Tesla's building here outside, Berlin, this gigafactory. They can do it, or they do at least, have a lot of modern software. But I think 95% of the manufacturing companies, they just simply won't build a new factory from scratch today because, it's
No.
super costly and they have, existing machines, they have existing, factories and so on built up. So that's why I think it's so tricky because there's all this legacy infrastructure, all these custom-made developers. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, Accenture is having a great time in manufacturing. They're building so many custom-made solutions. They're making so much money with this, right? And it's a bit frustrating because then you see all these different systems, but they don't really talk to each other. And again, that's why I think standardization, APIs, interfaces, infrastructure is probably the single biggest leverage to bring all these factors into the digital age.
Yeah, and the scary part, in my opinion, is the people who control most of the keys are not making it easy for anyone else. If you think about the stark difference between GitHub and its ecosystem in comparison to the big 4 or 5 PLM companies, it is like night and day. I'll give you an example. Our company did integration with a PLM tool.
Mhm.
It took, like in earnest, to do it really right, probably took 8 to 12 months. We did an integration, just a POC, way more complicated in terms of like what the actual functionality was with Jira. 2.5 weeks, 2.5 weeks versus like a year.
Mhm.
And the year team had 4 people on it, and the 2.5 weeks was one developer. And like that difference is going to make the stack
Yeah.
until it opens up impossible. But what I think is changing is there's this unbundling happening in the market right now where companies are realizing they want point solutions that play well with everything else, that do a really damn good job of fixing a problem, and not big all in one solutions that do nothing very well, but just happen to have the same logo in the top corner. Because with the way APIs are built today, you don't even need to know what software you're in. Like if you do it right, the tools should plug together so seamlessly
Mhm.
that you don't even need to know. Like I don't even go into Gong for our sales team. I
Yeah.
get it in Slack. I hardly even I'd log all my deals in Slack and I'd push it to Salesforce. Like I don't even know. I just work and the data just ends up in the right place. And that's like a huge shift that I think is going to come, and it's going to cause friction. Like it's going to cause friction with some of the bigger players because those 500 companies on your map are going to make that happen over time. Like the people, innovators getting involved, they're going to be pissed off. I think that other companies are making it difficult on purpose for competitive reasons to not let you integrate. I think it's going to end up becoming this whole thing over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's just a question of timing for me. And I think also the more infrastructure there is built, the faster companies can grow, the more we will see actually momentum in the space. For me, it's just
Yeah.
like a matter of time when this will come, right? Because to be very fair, I think a lot of capital has been flown also to many of these companies, in Europe. And I think, as far as I know, there's definitely investors, who have had very high expectations, and these expectations have not met yet, right? And there haven't been, loads of really big outcomes in this industry now in terms of like tech companies that got created in manufacturing. And again, I think it's only a question of timing, and nobody can predict that timing. But I think at some point we will get there. But to be very fair, I think you also need to put into consideration that in the last 5 years, I think people had, or investors at least, had probably higher expectations than what the market, yeah, what
Delivered.
the market delivers.
Why do you think that is? What do you think caused the like misfire now over the last 5 years?
I think many of these solutions on a theoretical level make completely sense, right? I mean, why would you have the software that controls your manufacturing shop floor not in the cloud, right? Or
Yeah.
why wouldn't mechanical engineers not collaborate in the cloud about designs? So, and
Yeah.
again, the problem is, I think, existing infrastructure, super hard, always very unique, even within the same company, two
Mhm.
factories. I think people assume once you sell to one factory, you can easily expand to all the other factories of the same customer, but they maybe have completely different systems, right? And
Yeah.
so it's again integration efforts and so on, which can then dramatically slow down the sales cycles and integrations. And I think then software companies cannot show the growth that I think investors expect. And then as an investor, of course, if you not only invest in manufacturing and you compare a traditional SaaS company with one that's selling to manufacturing, and you see the one is going from 1 to 3 or 4 million ARR, and the other one is going from 1 to 1.5. I mean, people place their bets differently.
So what do you think's the risk there? Like, do you see a world where people stop investing in manufacturing, which means there's less tech startups, which means all the, companies who need this help end up just not getting it? Like, what do you think's going to happen if there's not a change?
So I'm very bullish on change that comes from the outside, meaning, the disruption in manufacturing will definitely also come strongly from the outside, which means, not from companies that already exist, but from new entrants like Northvolt, is creating a new factory for batteries. Tesla is a good example. In space, we have SpaceX and we have Marder Space, for example. So I think there will be more and more founders who have very ambitious plan, let's say also for sustainable
Yeah.
manufacturing, and I think there are investors who want to back ambitious founders with ambitious opportunities in the manufacturing space and are willing then to invest a lot of money up front. Because I think
Hmm.
if you need to build a factory from scratch, it will cost you a lot of money. There's no way around
Yeah.
that. But that's something I'm very, very excited about. I also think companies that sell to manufacturing companies with a very low integration effort can
Hmm.
definitely show that growth. And then the third point is what I mentioned now a few times is like just the more infrastructure we have built, the easier it is for
Hmm.
new solutions to plug and place into these other solutions or on the factory floor. The easier it will come for them to scale. Because I think if you can slow down the sales cycles, if you can get rid of or even at least slow down integration effort, then these companies also can grow very fast because there's enough players actually in the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny what you said there about like the disruption from the outside. I spoke with senior engineer in one of the main like auto tier ones recently, and he told me that Tesla, just based on how fast they move in comparison to traditional automotive development, has forced the big traditional OEMs to shorten their new product development like life cycle from say it was 48 months to 36. He said to me it was a full 12 months needing to be trimmed off for them to stay competitive. And I'm seeing that now on the other side. I'm seeing all the big players in automotive now say, we need better tools. We need to move faster. We need to be able to get things out in the market quicker, launch faster. Like I'm starting to see that now. Like that pressure has changed the dynamic there. And probably the same thing will happen in SpaceX and in the aerospace world. But I think you're right. Like I don't think it's going to change holistically for the companies to put pressure on all the software vendors to just move fast, well, or even just change their own way to move faster until it's like a dire thing. But I think we're at that inflection point, man. I really think like there's not a whole lot many years left. The market's going to hit a recession. Um, there's going to be winners and losers. The teams who are ready to adapt to it this time around are going to come out stronger than ever. The ones who are not are going to get crushed when the market slows down. So
Yeah, and I think there's two
I don't know.
trends as well that play into this. I think on the one hand, all the macroeconomic trends with, let's say, sustainability and rethinking of your supply chains, maybe even onshoring, right? Getting production back to America
Yeah,
or to Europe, right? And less outsourcing. And I think resilience in the supply chain. So that I think is again a big factor. And a second one maybe we haven't touched on, but I think the hyperscalers are playing a more and more dominant role. So for IoT platforms, I think the hyperscalers, meaning Google, Microsoft, Amazon, I think the market share went to 15% from like I don't know 3-4% like 5 years ago. So it grew tremendously, right? And I think
yeah,
these companies I would definitely bet on. So first, I think they have distribution, especially Microsoft in that industry, and second, they know how to build developer tools and software products. So it's going to be very, very difficult for existing players, I think, to compete with them in terms of product. So I think that's
yeah,
another, dominant factor that's putting pressure on, let's say, existing players, even in the PLM, and
yeah.
CAT area.
So before we kind of wrap up and dive, I want to dive into a little bit more of point nine to where you are today, all the stuff you've done there,
Yeah.
and then dive in. Where can people get this information? If I'm thinking about this, you've got the newsletter, you got the community. What's the right place to join and sign up to kind of get a hold of this? Because I know I've gotten tons of value, and I think lots of people will get value from this. Where can they go?
Yeah, I mean, follow me on Twitter. I think that's probably easy. And then yeah, the newsletter that I send out every couple of months is probably the best source in the community. Futuremanufacturing.io. You can sign up for the waitlist. That's probably another one. And I think in the end, I think as long as you're in the market and talking to many people, you get a ton of
Yeah.
learning as well.
Sweet. So, what took you away from point nine? Like, you've got all this insight. I remember meeting you at point nine when we were talking back. Geez, it must have been 3 years ago. We were in Y Combinator, I think,
I
at the
think I
time.
was too slow, right?
So, anyways,
You know
what
what
took you?
happens often with YC companies. If you're not physically in SF, at least back then when it was still not remote.
Yeah,
For
it was. I don't know if I ever told you. I think we did. We did our seed round in 9 days, I think. Open and closed money in bank. It was like the biggest whirlwind. I think I met 60 VCs in 9 days. And it was just like you'd leave that call and someone would send you a check on the way back. It was absolutely wild, that experience. That's a time and discussion for another day. But what took you away from Point Nine? What got you out of the VC world into doing your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was my first job, and I think, probably the best job I could have wished for. A lot of
Hmm.
freedom, responsibility. I was meeting amazing founders every day. I learned so much about company building in the early days, and I also was part of, several boards and worked together with the founders. And I think over time, I realized I'm not in the driver's seat. I'm only in the observer seat. And for me, it was very clear, at some point I want to be in the driver's seat. And so the more time that went into it, I also realized that this is something I want to do. And I think, the longer you stay in this industry, the harder it is to move to the other side. So it's a little bit like the
Yeah.
consulting or so, right? So either you go, the fully fledged career from, analyst to partner, or I think you make the switch, but it's, the more time passes, the harder it is to make that switch. And so for me, then, it was that time where like, hey, I turned 30, I thought about my next 10 years. And so for me, it was very clear, okay, there's only one move I need to do now. And when I was leading Point Nine, I think one problem I fell in love with and I got really excited about. It's a very complex, it's a very big problem, but it's a workforce crisis. I heard it a
Hmm.
lot of the times in manufacturing specifically, right? So, hey, Robin, of course we need software, we need new tools, but
Yeah.
the biggest hindering factor for us actually is, around people. We don't even have the skills, in-house today that we need. It's impossible only to basically solve this problem by hiring external people. The war of talent is crazy. So the only way for us to stay innovative and to grow is actually, doubling down on job mobility, and enabling
Hmm.
our own workforce, to move into different jobs and roles, or at least make them better in the current ones. And I think in Europe, or especially in Germany, this problem is even more critical because it's similar to climate change. Today, we know in
Hmm.
2050, there will be 35 million fewer workers in Europe. It's a fact, and it's a fact we just cannot change today. And so, how will you do this? And I think my thesis is basically, that we enter the golden age of people. So companies will be very, very focused on their internal workforce and on people.
Hmm.
And so the only way for me actually, for these companies is to stay innovative is just to invest more and more into like employee engagement, employee enablement, and learning and development, which is part of this. So that's kind of like the overall thesis, the problem. What took me away from Point Nine, and then basically took my whole entrepreneurial journey so far.
Just unpack the stat. Like that many people moving, is it just straight up aging, or like what's going to cause the workforce to be that dramatically different? Like that's a huge number to try
Yeah,
and
it's
mitigate.
especially aging, and especially in Germany, I would say.
Wow.
And so, on the other hand, it's also, of course, people who don't have the skills today that they mastered, and
Yeah.
which is changing so much now with new technologies and so on. But it's definitely aging a lot, especially in Germany, that plays into that role.
So tell us about what you started. What was this obviously sounds like something could be your life passion going forward here. And
Yeah.
obviously something I hear every day. I hear it every day. People are always talking about, technology is cool, process is cool, but like really the people's the hardest part. And I agree. I think it's the hardest part in anything. No matter if it's starting a SaaS company or manufacturing a product, it don't matter. It's the hardest part. What are you doing now? Like what's the future? What's today look like?
So what I did initially was, I have this newsletter now for I think 4 years, Future Manufacturing, a couple of thousand subscribers. It enabled me very early on, to establish connection with founders like you, with other people in the industry. I actually was once, in Boston, and I, got invited from different founders in robotics. Hey, Robin, you want to come to our place? I show you our robots. Like, wow, this is so cool. I was
Yeah.
like, 1 or 2 years in the job, like these people with 20 years of experience, they invite me to their office, they show me their robots, and this is my job. Like, it was so cool. And so, like, hey, this newsletter enabled me to, make a lot of new connections. And I thought always, how cool would it be if this wouldn't be like, connections one by one, so between me and one person, but how can we actually move this to like a more, end to end connection? And so the first thing I actually did, was launching the future manufacturing community based on my newsletter. So this community now grew to 1 to 500 people on the wait list. We have 200 people within the community. There's a couple of events, different channels and so on. And Yeah, something that I think worked really well when I was starting it at the beginning of last year. And then I teamed up with my co-founder Marco in August to basically start Aveo. What we did, was we heard so much now of this problem. We need to basically help our people to learn from other operators and get practical insights. And so we basically started with offering cohort-based courses around topics such as digital transformation and manufacturing, which we were selling, to the likes of Bosch, Mercedes, and so on. And so basically, people could sign up for these courses. They lasted for 6 weeks, and there were 2 sessions per week, so it basically fits into their daily work. And we sold these these courses to different people in different companies, usually project managers or head of digitizations, who basically want to bring digitization to their factories.
Sweet, that's awesome. And that was August. We're here now today. What were the learnings? What's been like? Starting companies are painful. We've talked about this a number of times over the course of time, but like, what have you learned since then? And I'm happy to dive in.
Yeah. So now our vision basically is, we want to enable people to take on the jobs of tomorrow. I think that's very clear. That's what we want to do in the next, 10 years or even longer. I think our courses, we got tremendous feedback, NPS of 78, which we're really proud of. People really loved it. But we also found, one of the problems was people loved it, but they couldn't buy. So meaning, we had people basically saying, "Hey, look, Robin, I would love to do this course. I think it's really relevant for my work, but you know what? My boss doesn't approve the budget. He basically says, in 6 months we can talk about my development plan, and then we can maybe see if this course is relevant for me or not, right?" Where another participant, we even had people then paying privately also for the courses due to this reason. But a lot of the times, basically internal processes, compliance, and so on, and also top-down management, where managers basically said, I don't think this course is relevant, without really knowing actually what it was about. But this top-down management and everything made it super hard for us, to basically get this bottom-up adoption for the courses. And so, even though people were super happy with the courses, they really loved it, they learned a lot of things, and we created a lot of value. We thought, hey, this industry is moving too slow, which is also, one of the reasons now why we're basically shying away from manufacturing. It's a pity a little bit, because I think the problem is tremendously big, right? They need to invest much more into learning and development and also in people. But I had conversations with people, and these are not small companies, but where managing directors told me HR for them is an admin function, right? And not a strategic priority. And I think, to be very honest, I'm so sure now some of these companies, they will die very slowly, very painfully, and you just cannot save them, right? Because if you have not understood this problem today, that you need to invest more in your workforce, I think it's too late.
Man, there's so much to unpack here. So, like, okay, what I'm taking here. So, we started off talking about trends in manufacturing. Obviously, one of the big ones we're seeing is the pain of just dealing with people who are not in the right roles, not having the right people. We're not even talking yet about people leaving companies left, right, and center.
Yeah.
And this like huge resignation that's happening. And now what you're saying is that for something that people are coming to you about, asking you for manufacturing insights from executives, so they're asking you, which company should we look at, Robin? How do we do this? You have the map, you have the community. Then when you actually give them an opportunity to learn this and like actually improve their people, they're like, oh, hold on now. We gotta wait for next year's budget cycle just to get a couple $1,000.
Yeah.
Like I think it's a shame, man, because like you have a perspective of 500 plus these companies. You've seen it on both sides of the table now, investor, community maker, and sort of a founder. And you're saying that like you're really gonna have to pivot to something else in the short term, at least, to get the velocity you need to be able to potentially go back if you have the energy for it to help fix manufacturing.
Yeah, that's a little bit what we're doing, right? I think for us it's just like a strategic focus. We could invest much more now into this area manufacturing, but I think from a company building perspective, and I think you know this probably better than I do, right? But we need to focus what's best for the business. I still, would love to solve this problem for manufacturing today, but I think for the overall success of our company, it would definitely slow us down, and I think that's not what we signed up for. I thought was very harsh, but I talked to one investor initially when I was starting, and I was like, look, I want to focus on manufacturing because I know how painful and how big the problem there is. And then she was saying basically, Robin, I think I love what you do, but I don't understand, why do you go into a dying industry? And I thought it was probably very, very harsh, but I also understand, I think, a little bit where she's coming from. Basically, companies, there's companies I think you just cannot help anymore. And it's also, I think, I'm a big believer in like creative destruction. And so,
Yeah.
some of these companies, they just won't exist anymore and new companies will enter. And I think that's the market.
The part you said too, like probably a minute ago, you talked about HR being just like an admin function and not a value center, like not a strategic focus.
Yeah.
I think I've never heard someone say it like that, but man, that could not describe better what's actually going on in the industry because it's the same thing where people don't invest in, like you talk about the factory stack. It's why they're not doing it is because they see it as only like, red and green on the P&L and like not actually investing in their people and the stack actually being the way to make this stuff better. There's a few, I will say, I'm talking to a few like bigger auto players, industrial players who have come around to this. And like one of their key corporate objectives is their people,
Yeah.
which I'm like, that's encouraging. But I think you're right. I think it's happening too slow. And I tell you, if the market goes down quickly here and they're not ready, we're going to have 30 and 40% layoffs again, just like when COVID started. But this time it's not going to come back the same way with the subsidies and all the rest that happen. It's just going to mean companies just don't exist or
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
merge.
there's also good examples. So I think, Bosch, for example, is doing a really good job in investing a lot in L&D, for example. And I think, if you look at where Bosch is today, I think they've done a really good job. And I think companies, that have a very clear vision how to digitize their business for the next 5 years, but also, have this bottom-up empowerment, empowering their teams and so on to build up towards this vision. I think these are the companies I have seen which are most successfully. So I think, in the end, this needs to come, top down as well as bottom up. But
Yeah.
most of the companies, if ever, I've seen only, the top down approach, which I think, is probably like too few, too less.
With the bottoms up part of that, say you're a person who cares about actually investing in people and the rest, but you're in a role where you're a manager, or you're an engineer, or even if you're a director in a big org, and you don't feel like you have the authority to make that change, or it's problems too big and it's someone else's. What can they do to like professionally stir the pot to kind of get this moving? What can they actually do right now to start moving this?
I mean, probably, we have, I think the first thing you need to invest in is culture. Right? It's the management style, the culture.
Yeah,
I think that's probably something that needs to change. It's very hard to change this from the outside, right? As like a
yeah,
third party or so. I think this needs to come really from the management, from the company internally. And it's something, where you maybe don't see the results early on, but it will take, years even until this materializes. And that's again, one of the things what you also were saying about. I think this industry is very ROI focused and sometimes very short term orientated, which I think is not great. And then, making larger bets, of course, people maybe do not have the risk. And it's also a little bit maybe because the industry has been doing really well, in the last 10, 20 years. So there were companies that, the business was just going through the roof for years without, needing to
yeah.
innovate quite a lot. And so I think now, there's a lot of disruption coming to this industry, a lot of changes, a lot of pressure, from the war of talent towards, new technology to the supply chain crisis. So I
Mhm.
think it's also very hard, right? So I honestly,
Yeah.
being now a CEO of an automotive company, where you have so much going on, it's crazy hard to steer that company towards, a path of success. It's crazy hard, I think.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very big challenge, but I think in the end, it needs to come from the management, from the culture, to have a stronger bottom up management style, and also, a bit more belief into teams. And I've seen
Mhm.
already, cases where this really leads to success, where people also trying to work more agile and empowering smaller
Yep.
teams. So there's a case, I think it's a case study by Audi, where I think they basically all of the frontline workers in the project at one Audi factory, they could, work together in squads how to build up their working plan and make it more agile, right? So where you, for example, work 3 days there and 2 days in a different segment,
Mhm.
and they did it themselves, right, without, the need of,
Yeah.
let's say, the management. And this apparently was a very successful project, just to name one example.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Like I think this like attitude and just focus, like I think actually just acknowledging that HR people investing there is actually important. People and like the systems are important. I think making that choice, like even if you just look at like give you an example. Look at Ford and like Jim Farley coming in leading the company. Like the energy that's like come out of some of that, like even just online. Like I can't imagine like internal, but I can see it online. You can feel it from employees just online, like just like that feeling of like, okay, there's something changing here culture wise.
Yeah.
Um, that is like so critical, and I think you're right. I think it changes that other problem, like the speed issue. It changes the ability to say, "Hey, let's wait for next year to look at the budget," because there might not be a next year, right? Next year may not work if it keeps going the way it's going, and your map of 500 companies might quickly turn to 50, and then they're going to start asking, how do we fix this problem? We're going to tell you, well, the 450 companies who would have helped you, they are all gone now. So you're on your own. So
Yeah, and also
that's
I think I'm a little bit scared actually for the industry that they won't be able to attract, all the upcoming talent like Gen Z and so on, right? Who wants to work, maybe a bit differently than older generations, who maybe doesn't work. Let's say in Germany, you have many factories who are outside the big cities, right?
mhm.
And now, how do you get this, 24-year-old computer science graduate, who has a top-notch degree to the countryside, working in a very, maybe, let's say, uh, boring
Yeah,
company. So how do you make this appealing? How do you make this sexy? How do you make this, attractive for this kind of generation?
yeah.
Because if not, where will you get the talent for the next 20 years?
I and on top of that, there's the great resignation going on. So on top of you're losing from the bottom and
Yeah.
they're retiring, you're actually not going to get the next generation. And I know it's happening. I'll give you an example. My engineering class, when I went through a decade ago, mechanical was the number one choice. Everyone was fighting to get into it. 10 years later, it is on the bottom of the pile.
Mm.
Software is the number one choice. And all my friends who are like, the top of the class have gone into software. And they're
Mm.
not going into it to get into manufacturing. They're going into it to build software products
Yeah.
for software companies. And that's a real problem, man. Like it's the same cluster of people in different cohorts that now have a completely different interest set. That's only going to make your problem you're describing 10 times worse over time, which is what I think is kind of interesting for the companies that are taking a different approach. Like I always say the EVs, for example, the true
Mm.
EVs, they're half software companies, man. Like they're a software company in the skin of a vehicle. Like there's so much software going on there that it's attractive to the new gen, and even the hardware teams work like software teams, or at least closer to it. That's like it's coming down the pipe, whether we want it or not. That is like realistically what's going to happen, and
Yeah, and that's why I think it's really I think these companies and everybody they shouldn't wait. That's why I'm actually so probably yeah, that's why I'm so obsessed with this problem because I think if you
yeah,
don't act now, it's gonna be too late in 5 years,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
you need to invest now. Like
I think that's awesome, man. So like looking at the stack, thinking about like action, making a call to action now, and just like literally just thinking about what's important for the future and not just like, 3 months from now, I think is like super critical. When can we expect the next map update as we wrap up here?
the last one was at the end of last year. I'm
Yeah.
usually doing it, every 6 to 5 months. Depends also a little bit, how much I'm seeing. I can tell you it's a little bit of work. And the thing
Yeah.
is, it's also a little bit of work because not only adding the new ones, but every time some companies also just disappear, and usually, companies do not disappear with a boom. So it's not like
No.
you're seeing a new funding round of a company, and okay, it makes sense to add them. And there's no, I think I haven't seen like a great just data source for doing this in an automated way. That's why maybe it's a
Hmm.
little bit like manual and more curated. But that's actually one of the most big challenges for me to which are the companies maybe that I should just put out the map because they were acquired or they unfortunately had to
Yeah.
shut down because that's usually the latter one is usually very quiet, which you don't see.
Yeah.
But you
You,
learn a
you
ton
need a
from this, I can tell you.
you need a part-time detective degree to make it all work. Rob, man, I really appreciate. First of all, I appreciate you joining, but I more so appreciate the effort you're putting in to doing all the things you're doing for the manufacturing world. I think
Thank you.
that map itself, I can appreciate how ridiculous that must be to put together and keep on top of. But even just going through and all the things you're offering to people, I really think is super critical. So,
Yeah, and I'm happy,
yeah,
happy to help other founders or other people who are building in the space. Maybe some of the words now, sound a little bit, let's say, or maybe have like a negative touch because we basically were a little bit frustrated with how slow the industry moves. On the long run, I'm extremely bullish on this industry. I think we will see many big companies created today in the next 10 years in this industry. I just think, it's a matter of timing until we see this inflection point. And I think it's super hard for everybody to predict that timing. And I think for some
Mhm.
maybe verticals or some applications, we might see it today. For some, maybe we'll see it, in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. But overall,
Mhm.
I'm really excited. And for us, it doesn't mean that we don't want to solve this problem in manufacturing in the long run. But it's just like a strategic focus for us, focus on a sector with tech companies now, it just moves faster, where it's easier for us. And then hopefully in
Yeah.
the long run, we can also help the companies that survived until then to help their
Yeah.
workforce up leveling into the next generation.
Well, it's all about where you invest, right? That's the key theme of this is investing in the right thing at the right time. And right now for manufacturing is people. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you joining, Rob, man. Thank you so much for all the insights you
Thank
shared
you.
today.
Thanks for the good
And
discussion, man.
look forward to it again. Awesome.
Take care.